Hello, Common Sensors, friends of Common Sense Academy, but most important, hello, patrons. Thank you for supporting me on Patreon, and thank you for tuning in today to watch this exclusive video. What I want to talk about today is the legal framework under which First Amendment operators go out and videotape police and other government officials. Oftentimes I get the question in my comments, is it legal what they're doing? When are they breaking the law? How can they get away with this? Is all of this actually okay under the First Amendment? So I'm going to read an article that I found, and I'm going to add my analysis to it so that all of us can get a better understanding of when First Amendment auditors are doing something within the law and when they are doing something outside of the law. I do think that this is very important because if you read a lot of articles on First Amendment auditors, police stations and law enforcement around the country are taking a harder line against them. I recently did a video where a couple of First Amendment auditors out in Texas were convicted of disorderly conduct. Now, that's not a real serious crime, but it is a crime. And what these auditors were doing was they were verbally harassing the police. Well, when does that become illegal? Okay, and I'm just to start you off here, videotaping the police from a distance and not interfering in police work is generally okay. But if your words or actions get out of line to the point that it interferes with the police work, that's when your First Amendment rights are no longer going to protect you. So I am going to read from this article. It's called The Rights and Limits on Filming in Public Facilities by Aidan Mathis, MRSC Local Government Success website. Okay, and he says here, First Amendment audits are an alarming recent phenomenon that have been occurring in local government agencies across Washington and the country. These audits typically involve private citizens videotaping or otherwise recording an interaction with local government, such as the police or another official performing their duties inside City Hall or perhaps inside another government building. A little sidetrack, I just made a video on these auditors going into a post office. Tell me, patrons, what is the point of auditing a post office? Are they checking the price of stamps? Are they making sure that they're not overcharging for those envelopes? I mean, holy crap, I want a stamp with JFK on it, and if you're advertising it but not selling it, you better believe I'm going to hold these post office employees to their job. I mean, give me a break, dudes. Okay, these auditors are intentionally pushing the boundaries of the First Amendment rights to see whether a city responds in a way consistent with what the auditors believe their rights to be. They may be belligerent or confrontational. Sometimes they attempt to induce a violation of their rights, which can serve as the basis of a legal claim against the government. And that's the concern with some of these auditors is, are they out there just trying to create a lawsuit so they can get money? One thing's for sure, they're out there to put their stuff on YouTube and make money off that. Okay, we're going to explore what rights they have. So what rights do the public have to film? Members of the public do have broad rights to film interactions with government officials and police officers in Washington state. So just an aside, this article focuses on Washington state. However, the Washington state court is interpreting constitutional law. So this is likely the framework for the entire United States, but I can't say that for sure. Under local Washington law, it's a crime to record any private conversation without obtaining the consent of all parties engaged in it. Courts have repeatedly held that this law, however, does not apply to public conversations between citizens and police officers. The Ninth Circuit Federal Court of Appeals acknowledged the First Amendment right of citizens to film police officers carrying out their duties in public in the case of Fordyce v. City of Seattle. Later, in Lewis versus State Department of Licensing, Washington State Supreme Court also ruled in favor of recording public police activity in the context of a traffic stop. The court held there was no reasonable expectation of privacy. Hang on a second here. In a brief official business conversation between an officer and a driver on the highway. making that law that protects the private conversations inapplicable to that situation. In addition, citizens lawfully present at the scene of police activity may express verbal criticism, even profane and abusive criticism, towards police officers carrying out their duties, so long as citizens do not physically touch the officers or issue threatening statements or movements. See State v. EJJ. Thus, members of the public do have the right to record police in the public performance of their duties, even when the recording involves abusive language directed towards the officers. These rights also likely extends to recording of other government officials in public spaces, such as City Hall. While there's not been a case explicitly granting such a right, the reasoning behind Lewis versus State Department of Licensing should apply to other public employees as well. As with the traffic stop in Lewis, there's likely no reasonable expectation of privacy for a conversation between a government official and a citizen in places that are open to the public. The State Attorney General has also opined that citizens have a right to record open public meetings, such as City Council, giving some additional support to the notion that citizens have the right to record their government's public conduct. Therefore, citizens likely do have the right to record any government business that occurs in areas open to public eyes. What can cities or governments do? Although citizens have broad rights to record their government, there are limits that can be imposed. If the behavior of an auditor interferes with the operation of government or ability of other members of public to use a public facility, an auditor may be removed from the property they would otherwise entitled to be in. That's State v. Blair. Note that such a disruption would have to consist of more than the mere act of recording. In order to be lawfully removed, the auditor's actions must make it impossible for city business to continue in an orderly fashion. Profane or abusive language alone doesn't create a significant disruption by itself. Only if such language qualifies as a physical threat or fighting words, or if the act of speaking itself disrupts city business, then there would be cause for members of the public to be removed. Local government can also act to prevent filming in areas that are not open to the public. Auditor access would constitute trespassing, and any conversations recorded would be private. Ultimately, if an auditor doesn't run afoul of these boundaries, the best advice for local government staff and elected officials is to ignore them and not engage with them except to conduct business. Otherwise, a confrontation with an auditor may lead to a public allegation of a violation of their constitutional rights, i.e. a lawsuit, both in the press and online, and perhaps even to a court challenge that the jurisdiction has attempted to violate the public's constitutional rights. So that lays out the framework that I've been talking about as a whole. Interesting distinctions here. So this is true in Pennsylvania. We call it the wiretap law. You can't record a private conversation between two individuals without their consent. That's actually can be a criminal act in Pennsylvania. Looks like Washington has a similar law. Okay, so two private people, you're standing there recording their conversation. You can't do that as an auditor. However, an auditor can record the conversation of public officials in public. Like we said, police officers talking to civilians, okay? One of those individuals is a police officer, and there's no reasonable expectation of privacy for those parties in that actual interaction. So that can be recorded. Now, police officers can do things to prevent that from being recorded. They can go to a more private area, et cetera, but if it's happening out in the public, in a public space, it can be recorded. Like I said at the beginning, the interesting thing about this is, where is the line between an auditor recording and perhaps saying vulgar things to the police and it becoming a disruption of the police activities or other government officials, say at City Hall, at a courthouse, at a post office, as I talked about earlier? Where is that line? It's not clear where that line draws. So can an auditor stand there and record the police during a traffic stop? The auditor can sit there quietly and just record, pick up your phone and just record and do it quietly without disruption. That's going to be legal 99% of the time. But when they get it, when the auditor starts injecting themselves into the situation, they're opening themselves up to criminal activity. There's another prior video I did. I'll link it below. I can't remember what it's called right now. And like I said, in Texas, this auditors were convicted of disorderly conduct. It appears they were following the police and continuously verbally badgering them. And the judge likely saw that this crossed a line that should not have been crossed, and the judge decided this was no longer an infringement of the auditor's First Amendment rights. They went too far in disrupting the police work. Okay, so they were arrested, charged, and ultimately convicted. This is a developing area of law. It will be interesting to see how it plays out over the next couple of years. As far as auditors going into places like post offices, etc., they're going to be able to video the lobby. They can go into a police station and video the lobby. What they can't do, most likely, okay, and this isn't 100% clear, is if there's two private individuals in a public space having a conversation and they happen to be in there recording, okay, and they record that conversation, that in and of itself may be illegal, even though they're in a public place like the waiting room of a government building, but they're recording a private conversation where those people would likely have a reasonable expectation of privacy. The other thing too with government buildings, I've talked about this in past videos, they're in a post office, they can do the lobby, the hallway, certain areas, but they can't go into an individual public worker's office and start recording. There could be confidential information there, and even though it's a public space, an expectation of privacy will arise. So the point to remember is if these auditors are standing there silently recording, doing it in lobbies or out in public, they're likely not breaking the law. They may be annoying, okay? And even if they're using certain words, they're likely not breaking law. But some of these auditors, you watch these videos, okay, they're injecting themselves into a situation, or they are instigating the public official or the police to take a further action. That's when they're crossing a line, and their First Amendment rights are likely no longer going to protect them. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm going to link to the article below. I'm going to link to the prior video that I did where an auditor was convicted of disorderly conduct. And, go ahead, watch those, take this into account. When you watch more videos in the future, you'll have a better understanding of when these auditors are acting correctly and when they are not. Thank you for being a patron. Thank you for being a fan. You are my most important fans that I have. I appreciate what you do. Your donations allow me to take the time to research and make fun and interesting videos like this. Thank you for joining the Common Sense Academy. And before we go, I forgot. Let's do our same time sip. It tastes better when we sip it together. So if you have a drink, a beverage, whatever it is, some ice in it, maybe it's cool, maybe it's room temperature, you drink your whiskey neat. Cheers. See you all soon.